This is John McMurray of the Society for American Baseball Research, and we're pleased to be joined tonight by former Major League pitcher Frank Viola. Frank was one of the premier pitchers in baseball for 15 Major League seasons during a career which spanned from 1982 through 1996. He won the World Series Most Valuable Player Award with the Minnesota Twins in 1987, the Cy Young Award the next season, and was an All-Star 3 times. During his time with the Twins, the Mets, the Red Sox, the Reds, and the Blue Jays, he won 176 career Major League games with a 3.73 ERA. A model of durability, Frank started more than 30 games in a season each year from 1983 to 1992 while winning 20 games in each league. And we are recording this oral history with Frank's permission on December the 17th of 2024. And Frank, I want to start out by asking you, what got you interested in baseball?
I guess it started when I was 6 years old. My dad was a big, let me preface this by saying my dad was a big proponent of everything I did. He was not a baseball player. He was not a great athlete, but he was a fan of the game. And when he was a kid, he grew up a New York Giant fan, and Mel Ott was his favorite player. And then when the Giants moved, it went from Mel Ott to Willie Mays. And then when Willie Mays came along and the Giants moved to San Francisco and the Mets came into existence, we started and remained a National League fan of baseball. And then Willie Mays came to the Mets, so my dad taught me the game at 6 years old, teaching me first and foremost how to keep score, what baseball is all about, all the stuff that got me to the point where I just fell in love with the game. So from 6 years old to 17 years old, we went to 11 games a year. We went to 10 Met games to root for the New York Mets, and we went to one Yankee game, so my dad let me know there was another New York team. And that's how it played out. My dad then became, when Willie Mays retired, he became a Tom Seaver fan. And it probably took me 3 or 4 years in the big leagues before I overtook Tom as my dad's favorite player. Person that got me involved in the game, and the love of baseball took over from there.
As a young person, what other players were influences on your own playing style?
I can't say anybody in particular, just for the fact that I was a first baseman, first and foremost, and I didn't really follow anybody as far as first base was concerned. I guess when I really fell in love with the game was in '68. I was watching the World Series, and believe it or not, it was the Detroit Tigers playing the St. Louis Cardinals. They had Bob Gibson and Denny McLain, and that's when Mickey, I'm so overweight, Lolich, but boy, can I pitch, took over that series and won 3 games. But the guy I fell in love with in that series was Willie Horton, left fielder for the Detroit Tigers. And from that moment on, I was a Detroit Tiger fan before anybody. And it was so funny because growing up in Long Island, New York, I was a Detroit Lion fan in baseball. I mean, a Detroit Tiger fan in baseball and a Detroit Lion fan in football. How, why, I don't know. But that's how it came into existence. And Willie Horton was the first guy that I just followed and fell in love with.
And you mentioned about being a first baseman at one point. Tell us about how you transitioned into pitching.
Well, first baseman, I started playing baseball at 9 years old for the Police Boys Club. And then the following year, my mom and dad put me in Little League, and I just enjoyed the time. And now let me backtrack just a hair. Baseball wasn't my number one love. It was basketball. I fell in love with basketball at a very young age. I guess 8, 9 years old. That's when the Knicks were there with Willis Reed coming into the game when he was gimpy and stuff. And I fell in love with the Knicks. But there was a basketball player in LA with the LA Lakers by the name of Gail Goodrich, left-handed guard for the Lakers, and I fell in love with the shooting style. I was a small guy at that time, so I just wanted to be Gail Goodrich. So basketball season was basketball, baseball season it was baseball, and from that moment on, and I think that if I'm fast forwarding to the game today, I wish more players would take the time to play other sports instead of having a single sport for 12 months because you can burn out so easy, especially with everything going on. We'll talk about that later on. But, it's basketball, baseball, and I guess to answer your question, I was a first baseman until my junior year in high school. And my junior year in high school, one of our pitchers got hurt. Mike Kosnick, an old school baseball coach from East Meadow High School, who was my coach, came up to me and said, "You know what? You're left-handed. You are an athlete. You ever try pitching?" I said, "Sounds good. Well, why not try it?" And the rest is history. I was fortunate. I had a really good delivery. I had a fastball and a slow curve. That's all I used from my junior year through my senior year. And after my senior year, I got drafted by the Kansas City Royals in the 16th round out of nowhere. I didn't even know people were following me. And it was weird because I got drafted before I even got a college scholarship offer. Not too many people could say that. So I was very fortunate that Coach Kosnick saw something in me on the mound, and either that or he knew I was a lousy hitter and I better get on the mound. Otherwise, I might not have a future. But it worked out well.
I know that at a clinic in 1969, you had heard Jerry Koosman, and he spoke about not throwing a curveball too young. Recount that experience for us.
Eisenhower Park. It was Eisenhower Park in 1969, as you said, and Jerry Koosman and Buddy Harrelson. It was the year the Mets won the World Series, the Miracle Mets, and it was before the series itself. It was during the season, but on a day off, they came out and spoke to the crowd. And never forget, I still use this today with every kid I talk to. Jerry said in that speech, until you're 14 years old, until your arm develops, do not throw a curveball. Fortunately, I wasn't pitching at the time, so it didn't work out. It worked out fine as far as I was concerned. But that's what I teach the kids today. You only have a short career, a short shelf life as far as pitching is concerned. Make sure you do it right. And I had the opportunity at the end of Jerry's career. He was finishing up his career at the White Sox in Old Comiskey Park, and I was facing him. And I was like my second year in the big leagues, and I told my pitching coach, I said, "I'll be over on my side in a little bit, but I got to go over there and say hi to Jerry." And I walk over there right before he started warming up. I said, "Mr. Kuzman, I was at your clinic in 1969, and boy, you meant a lot to me, and you had a great career." He told me, "Shut the hell up, get away from me, don't let me feel as old as I am." And I walked away. That was it. It was the end of my conversation with Jerry. But I mean, it was wonderful meeting him, and he had a terrific career, and he had a lot to do with my success as far as my pitching goes too.
You mentioned about the Kansas City Royals and being selected in the draft. Did you think of joining the Royals, a team that had some really quality talent at that time?
Truthfully, no, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for the real world. I was immature. I was mommy and daddy's boy. I was home doing kid stuff. And all of a sudden now they're telling me I got to go down to that. When they started that Frank White baseball school in spring training and stuff, I would have been one of the first class of those guys doing it. And I just wasn't ready. Unfortunately, everything played out as it was supposed to because St. John's was playing in the College World Series in 1978. They lost their first two games to Arizona State, led by Chris Bando, I believe, and then they lost to Southern Cal, who had major league talent all over the place. But Coach Russo came back early after their two losses, and he was coming to watch. We were having a district playoff game, and he was coming to watch the guy I was pitching against, John Morris. He ended up having a really nice career with the St. Louis Cardinals. He's a scout for the Cincinnati Reds for a number of years. He was pitching for Mepham High School on the island. And he came to watch Johnny pitch, and all of a sudden Frank Viola showed up. And we went extra innings. We went one extra inning. We ended up winning 1-0 or 2-1, something along those lines. And the game ended, and Coach Russo found me, came up to me, and goes, "Are you interested in playing college baseball?" And my dad was around. He listened to it and said, "Yeah, absolutely." He says, "Just so happens I have a full scholarship if you're interested in coming to St. John's and pitching for us." And I looked and checked, and then back then we didn't have any phones or anything that you could look anything up, but I just had heard and knew that St. John's was a elite program. Didn't know how good it was as far as their pitching coach was concerned. I guess we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it took maybe 24 hours. My dad, my mom, and I went back home. We talked about it and said it was a no-brainer, so I ended up going to St. John's.
You mentioned Coach Joe Russo, who had an influence. Can you explain to us how he got you focused on pitching and perhaps turned you away from being a hitter?
Well, first and foremost, probably because they were such a good hitting team to start with. But they were looking for a left-handed starter. And in that mix, it turned out later on was another lefty that was pretty darn good by the name of John Franco. So he brought a Brooklyn kid in, he brought a Long Island kid in, but the whole key to our whole conversation was the pitching coach, was Howie Gershberg. And Howie was his main emphasis on teaching me the finer points of pitching outside of just throwing the baseball and getting outs. And my 3 years at St. John's, I could probably say at 64 years old that Howie was one of my top three uh, people who made my career the way my career ended up. Uh, he sat me down, he sat Johnny down, he talked about pitching, he talked about game plan, mental aspects of the game, all the stuff that you don't sometimes take into consideration. You just want to get out there and throw the ball. But Howie was everything I was looking for and needing at that time. And it just, you talk about just a university and a situation full of the players. It was just absolutely perfect for myself, and the rest is history.
This leads to a question from Mike. Rotten Darling always talks about your epic college game, and he was wondering your thoughts on it. It's called the greatest college baseball game ever played, which is something to be proud of for sure. Mike says, "This in this game, you faced your who would be your an eventual Mets teammate, Ron Darling, who was playing for Yale." Darling pitched 11 innings of no-hit ball before giving up the only hit, a leadoff single in the 12th, which led to the only run. And you threw 11 innings of shutout ball. Tell us about what you recall about that game.
Well, it was so funny because, we had heard about Ronnie, but we also knew it was Ivy League baseball. We didn't expect Ivy League baseball to make St. John's work a little bit. But after the third hitter of the game, I think our DH at the time, Don Giordano, came in after striking out. He looked at the dugout and goes, "Oh my God, this might be the best pitcher I've ever seen in my life." And we knew we were in for a long game. It was, and as I said, I've been around baseball for 55, 56 years. To this day, I could say it was the best pitch game I have ever seen. Ronnie was in such control from first pitch to last pitch, and it was a pleasure watching him pitch. My biggest thing was after each inning, I had to turn to the scoreboard and make sure there was a zero on the board just to make sure we still had a chance to win the game. But the thing that made it historic, I guess, was that Roger Angel, who just passed away this last year at 99 years old, a great writer for the New Yorker and just a great writer, period, and a great human being, happened to be at the game interviewing Smokey Joe Wood of the Boston Red Sox, Hall of Famer, lefty pitcher, and our game broke out. And there was no expectation to him. He was going to have this article, write this article about Smokey Joe and all this. And all of a sudden, Ronnie and I had a duel. And it just started out as that. And before you know it, 2.5 hours later, we're in the 11th inning, no score. He's still got a no hitter going, 17 punch outs. I've given up a few hits, but nothing drastic. And, the rest he wrote about. And that's why it's so infamous, because he was there, they were there. And the story went from Roger talking to Smokey Joe to Roger and Smokey forgetting about that conversation and watching Ronnie and Frank pitch a ball game and watch St. John's and Yale play. And, it's an honor being part of that. It's an honor being involved in that scenario. But I have to thank Ronnie for making me as in the limelight, because if he didn't pitch that ball game, I don't know where we would have been. I mean, it was just an amazing, amazing game, day, what have you. And the kicker of the whole story is this. We ended up winning 1-0 in the 12th inning. So the next day, Yale's got to get up early and play the losers bracket game. So we get to sleep in a little bit. We get to the ballpark around the 5th inning, and Yale is playing whoever they're playing, Central Michigan or somebody along those lines. And Ronnie's playing right field, and he's batting third still. And I could barely wipe my butt the next day because I threw so many pitches. And it just so happened when we sit down before batting practice to watch a couple of innings, there was a fly ball hit to the warning track in right field, the man on third base. And Ronnie threw a two-hopper to the plate from like 300 feet out. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. What an athlete he was. And it was just great to go up against him, compete against him. And then the best part was getting to be a teammate and a friend of his as we got to play Major League Baseball. So the whole story in itself is special, but it's that one special attachment Ronnie and I have that nobody could take away from us, because it was a game that was pretty special for all of us.
This leads into a question from Dakotas. Given the prominence of this pitching matchup, how much did it matter to you who was pitching for the other team? Did you feel you were going head to head against the other team's starter, or was it really sort of two parallel batters of a pitcher versus a lineup?
Well, that's baseball today with the DH. I mean, you're not really facing you're facing a pitcher, but you're not facing. Although Ronnie did hit back then, so he was actually pitching and helping himself out. Um, yeah, we're the focus of the game, of course, the pitchers, but the game has changed with the DH rule and everything with it. But the bottom line is you still have to beat your opponent, and that's what we were able to do that day. The funny thing about that matchup, though, is people they talk about Ronnie and I, but in that game there were five professional athletes that played. It was myself and Ronnie. Then we had Johnny Frankel, who didn't play in the game, but he would pinch ran, so he was actually involved in the game. Who had a pretty good, as we talked about, and we'll probably talk about, career in the major leagues. But Yale had two guys that played other major sports. The right fielder, Rich Diana, played. He's a world-class orthopedist now, but he played a couple of years of NFL football with the Miami Dolphins. And the kicker was the Yale shortstop who booted the ball to prolong the inning in the 12th inning to give us that opportunity to win 1-0. Ended up having a really good professional career with the New York Rangers in hockey. So a lot of people don't realize that, but there were five professional athletes playing in that game, an East Coast game between St. John's and Yale.
After your college career, you signed with the Minnesota Twins after you were drafted in the second round in the '81 Major League Baseball draft. The Twins had been a struggling team. How did you feel going to Minnesota?
Well, I mean, it was a great opportunity, no question. Let me go back just a hair. That game against Ronnie, my junior year, moved me from what the scouts told me from the fifth round to the second round. That's how much that game helped me personally as far as my stock was concerned. But I ended up going to Minnesota, knew they were struggling. They were losing 100 games pretty much every year. And I knew I had an opportunity. We held out for a little bit back then, a little bit, maybe 3 or 4 days. Um, their first initial offer for a second round pick was just awful. And my dad basically kicked the scout out of the room and told him, when you're ready to come in with a specific offer that makes sense for us, we will sign. We ended up having to move the signing session from my house because my dad didn't invite the scout back to St. John's, where Coach Russo and Coach Gersberg were like, okay, let's think this through. You're with an organization that's losing. You got a situation where if you showcase yourself, you have an opportunity to move through the system quickly, and then increase the offer a little bit. And then long story short, around 4 or 5 days later, I ended up signing with Minnesota, got sent directly to Double A. I skipped rookie ball, A ball, went right to Double A. And it just so happened my Double A manager at that time was a guy by the name of Tom Kelly, who ended up having a pretty good managerial career himself. And on that team were future teammates, Timmy Laudner, Randy Bush, Gary Gaetti, Tim Tuffle. I mean, you talk about guys, it was just a great situation to come from college program in the East Coast to Double A baseball. And the best part about that scenario was when I joined, they put me right in the rotation, and I had an opportunity to pitch the last game, the championship game against the Nashville Sounds, which was the Yankees Double A team, which had Willie McGee and Buck Showalter and guys like that on it. We ended up winning the Southern League Championship that year, and I got the win for the last game. So pretty good pretty good start to a professional career. So it worked out well.
And just going back to, you mentioned about how that game against Ron Darling elevated your draft stock. I mean, you were at the same time, you were 26-2. Do you think it was really that one game that made the difference in terms of your own pro prospects?
I'd like to think not, but I believe that being on the showcase like that and showing and proving myself, I think I mean, if we're talking truth here, I think what really helped was the year before we went to the College World Series and I ended up pitching the first game, the opening game in the College World Series against the University of Arizona, which was led by Player of the Year Terry Francona, and we ended up winning that game 7-1. And I think that's where I broke out as far as my name recognition, because as everybody knows, East Coast baseball doesn't compare to Texas, California, Arizona, those at that time, Florida, Miami. So I think that's where it started. That College World Series also helped me get the opportunity to play summer ball in Alaska against the best of the best. So I ended up and then I ended up going on the USA baseball team to Japan, Korea, and Taiwan for a month. So I think the College World Series set me up, but getting and pitching against Ronnie in a game like that probably put me over the top. And at that time, you got to realize I was a fastball, curveball. I didn't have a changeup. I didn't have that changeup that everybody talked about. I learned that in the big leagues. I was getting by on two pitches. How, why, I don't know, but I was very fortunate, and I think I needed as much help as I could get, and it all just played out. I couldn't have played out any better, actually.
Tell us about your first game in the major leagues, June 6th of 1982, against Baltimore.
Well, I remember my first hitter was Lenny Sakata. Well, let's backtrack a little bit. Leading up to, I went to AAA. I got to big league. I finished Double A. We won the championship, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. I got invited as a non-roster invitee to spring training. I was the last cut. I believe Calvin Griffith was the last family-owned ball club, the Griffith family. For whatever reason, he liked me, and I really believe that he was the main key to me surviving in the big leagues because we'll probably talk about my career early on. It was god awful. I absolutely stunk in the major leagues. I had no business being there, but they believed in me. And they thought that I would learn on the fly. So I ended up being the last cut in spring training. Went to AAA. Had around 6 or 7 starts in AAA, and the Twins decided, okay, we're going to trade all our veterans. We're going to go young. And that's when the opportunity arose. They said, he's not ready. Frank's not ready, well, I'm not ready, but I don't like talking to the third person. So Frank's not ready. I'm not ready, but we got to give him an opportunity and see what he can do. So they called me up, had my first big league outing at the Metrodome on June 6th, as you mentioned. And it was against a pretty good Baltimore team. Ripken, Cal was a rookie. Um, but my first couple of hitters, it was Lenny Sakata. He got an infield base hit to start my career off. And then Rich Dower was the two-hole hitter, and he hit a line drive BB, old school baseball where you hit behind the runner. It just happened. It went into Ken Herbeck's glove. We got a double play. And then, uh, geez, I can't think
I
of his
think
name.
Dan Ford was next.
Dan Ford? No, no, was it Dan Ford? I ended up getting him out. But my first big league strikeout was the Latino boy, Velez. It's going to ruin the whole story because anyway, my first major league strikeout next time through the lineup, he ended up hitting facing leading up to Benny Ayala. Benny Ayala, I struck out. My first big league strikeout was Benny Ayala, and then Benny came up the next time in the 5th inning and hit a 3-run bomb off of me. That was what it was. So
Those
next start, I got to pitch in Kansas City, and my mom and dad got my car in Orlando because in Toledo, where I had been playing AAA ball. They drove to Kansas City, and I got to face in my second major league start Vida Blue. And you talk about, my eyes got big. You talk about a left-hander who dominated. You know what he did in Oakland, what a run he had in Oakland. He ended up in Kansas. He had an unbelievable career. God rest his soul. But my second start, I got to pitch in Kansas City. My mom and dad were in the stands. They ended up going 7 innings and ended up beating Vida 4-2 for my first big league win. So it was a special couple of weeks right there. No question.
You mentioned about the challenges you faced early in your career, and that they were putting you in the rotation, but at the same time, you didn't have a strong team behind you. How did you manage with your own confidence, given that your ERA was
Sky high.
over 5 in both of your first 2 seasons? You had losing records. You were 4-10 in '82 and 7-15 in '83. How did you keep your confidence together?
I didn't. I struggled. I struggled a lot. That's when my dad came into play. My dad would give it to, I'd go out, go 5 innings, give up 5 runs, and call my dad up after the game. This is before cell phones and stuff. So I call him up, say, I pitched pretty well. Made a bad pitch here, bad pitch there. He goes, hey, Frank, look at the box score. You stunk. You got to work, you got to work harder. And that's what I did. And in '83, the blessing and the saving grace of my life came into play. I found my future wife, my wife of 41 years now, Kathy Daltus, a Minnesota girl. She probably was the biggest difference in my career because A, she settled me down. B, she loved baseball and put up with my crap. And C, I think having a wife and responsibility and having Frankie, my son, come along as quickly as he did taught me some responsibility and realized that, you know what, I have to really step it up now. And at that point, I think that all coming together and the talk of Johnny Padres, there's all leads up to this. As you mentioned, I was 11 and 20, what was it, 11 and 25?
25, yeah.
Yeah, and I had no business, as I said, struggling and stuff. But I was pitching a game in early '84, and Johnny came to my locker in the Seattle Kingdom and said, "We got to do something different." He says, "So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have Timmy Lardner sit in the middle of the plate from your first pitch to your last pitch. He's not going to move. Whatever he puts down, you're going to throw." And I'm like, "Oh, that's all I need. I'm not getting hit bad enough now. I got to do this." 8 innings later, I gave up 2 solo homers to Richie Zisk that went up probably 1,000 feet, but I left with a 6-2 lead. 0 walks, 6 strikeouts. I'm walking off the field. Johnny's sitting in the dugout with his legs crossed, his arms across his chest, and a big smile on his face. He goes, "Son, what'd you learn tonight?" I said, "I'm not bad, am I?" He goes, "No, you're damn good. You have to trust your stuff. You have to get ahead strike one. You have to pound the zone. You can't be playing around with the zone. What gets you in trouble is ball one, ball two. You get ahead strike one, you start pitching your game, and all of a sudden, and from that point on, my career skyrocketed because I stopped giving the hitters too much credit, and I started giving myself more credit. And the other change in me as well was I stopped crying and using excuses. Early in my career, I was the biggest crybaby. If my shortstop made an error, that was the reason why I pitched like crap. If the umpire missed a strike call, it was his fault. It wasn't my fault. I had an excuse for everything. And when I finally got to the point where I said, you know what, it's about time I take my own career in my own hands, and I started taking responsibility for myself, that also, at that time, helped my career take off. And I think all those pieces together made me the pitcher I became.
You mentioned how early in your college career you didn't have a changeup. At what point were you developing new pitches too?
Well, first of all, my first year I got called up in June, as you mentioned earlier, and I had 24 starts. And those 24 starts, I was the second easiest guy to run on in the league. So first and foremost, and back then the instruction league was 8 weeks or 6 weeks of solid work. You didn't go one inning and played around. You worked on something. So the Twins sent me to the instruction league, and for 6 weeks I had to learn the slide step, get the ball to the plate quicker because I didn't have a great move. And within a 6 week period, I became the second easiest runner to run on to one of the hardest runners, or one of the top 5 hardest runners the rest of my career, because I got the ball to the plate. Didn't have a great move, but I got the ball to the plate to give the catcher a chance. So that was the first one I had to work on. Then all of a sudden we had to work on another pitch, and that's when the changeup came into play. Johnny Padres, as people know, might have had the best changeup in the game at his time. You know, he won an MVP with the Dodgers when he had Koufax and Drysdale, but his changeup was a difference in the World Series. And he gave me the lecture that you have to learn this pitch. So we played around with the first pitch played around with like 10, 11 grips. I ended up going back to the first grip, which was a circle change. And I'll never forget the first time I ever threw the circle change. He said, "Let it rip." And I was on a back mound on the road somewhere where it was just my throw day. And I let it go, and it went all like 25 feet into the ground. It's like, how the hell do you throw this ball? I can't even feel the grip. I have no feel for it, anything. Anyway, long story short, it took me probably around 8 to 10 months to actually get the confidence just to even attempt to throw it in the game. And by the time I really started getting the feel for it, which was around a year and a half later, Johnny was fired as my pitcher coach. But the one thing that people don't realize was when he got let go, and it was a sad day for me because, as I said, he was my second biggest blessing in my career besides Howie Gersberg. He came to my locker before leaving the locker room, and he came up to me and says, "Son of a gun, don't you ever forget. Keep throwing that changeup. It's going to click, and it's going to change your career around." And I'll be a son of a gun. Within the next couple of months, I'm figuring it out. I got a feel for it. And all of a sudden now I go from a pretty good pitcher to above average pitcher just because of one additional pitch that somebody said you better stick with and keep throwing. And I have to thank Johnny so much for that. And he means the world to me.
And you went from 7-15 to 18-12 in one season. But also with that came a certain amount of pressure. Even Johnny Padre said at one point you might have some Sandy Koufax in you. What was it? What was it like dealing with those expectations?
Probably too much too soon at that time, looking back. I think that what we needed at that point was a veteran presence. I was not ready to be that bona fide number one. I was just learning the game myself. And all of a sudden now I'm responsible for 9, 10, 11 other pitchers. I have to talk about them, this, that, the other. I wasn't ready to handle that. Even with my confident New York nature, I wasn't ready to handle that. And the turning point number three at that time was in '86 when we traded for Bert Blyleven. And it was the trade of Bert that really made my career what it became because he became the spokesman. He became that guy that people went to because he was around forever. And it gave me the opportunity just to sit back and pitch instead of having the answer for everybody and everything. And to this day, he's my closest friend, one of my closest friends. And, he's the goofiest son of a gun off the field. But boy, when you talk about between the white lines, he led by example, and he was just great to be around. And I think that's where everything fell into place as far as my career was concerned.
Tell us about some of the other core players of the Twins at that time. In particular, Kent Herbeck was coming up roughly around the same time that you were. You mentioned Cal Ripken in '82. Herbeck back then was quite the phenomenon too.
You know, I thought Kent it didn't play out, but I thought Ken Herbeck was a Hall of Famer. I thought Ken Herbeck was a better player all around than Kirby Puckett was. But Kent had that support system in Minnesota. Minnesota boy, grew up right around the ballpark and stuff. But the thing that hurt him more than anything was his pops died of ALS when he was very young in his career. And he didn't have somebody that he could talk to, relate with. And I think that led to not taking care of himself as he could have. And I'm never going to say anything bad about Ken Herbert because he had a terrific career, one of the best defensive first baseman besides just a great ball player, and he was a local boy on top of that. But I think he could have been a Hall of Famer if he had the right people in place at the right time. And as you know, deaths, all that stuff occur in life, and you can't explain it. You can't just keep on going. And he's still Mr. Minnesota. Right, does everything for the Twins. I mean, he had a damn good career, all things considered. I just thought he was how good his. I could talk about Kirby all day. He became the leader there. Him and Herbie were leaders off the field. Gary Gaetti was a pretty darn good. It's funny. I'm mentioning all these names. Greg Gagne was a terrific shortstop. Dan Gladden came over and made the difference for us in the World Series. We had so much. Tom Bernansky had a terrific career. You look back and you realize, you know what? We were the underdogs, we thought, in '87 when we finally got to the playoffs and beat Detroit, and then we beat the Cardinals. But when you look back, offensively, defensively, there was nobody better. We were just a good bunch of young guys playing the game, having fun. The thing that hurt us was our starting pitcher. It was basically myself and Bert, and we struggled with the third, fourth, and fifth guy during the course of the year. I think that's what hurt us. But you get to the bullpen. Now bullpen's right up there with everybody. So I think that we didn't give ourselves enough credit to realize how good we were in '87. But thank God it worked out the way it did, because I'd be talking today after a 15-year career and never making the playoffs if it wasn't for '87. That's hard to say.
In, um, in terms of let's say the way the talent coalesced in Minnesota, what was the sort of the key factor to becoming a team as you did?
Just a bunch of young guys realizing we're tired of losing. We had the great Tom Kelly was just fantastic as far as getting us ready and prepared. We were at that time a full 25-man roster. He used a 25-man roster. There was no, 22 guys. That 23rd, fourth, and fifth guy were nobodies. They all played important roles, and I think that's how we ended up winning it. The three key acquisitions for us going into the '87 season, I think that made us the World Series champions, were we got a leadoff hitter. We got Dan Gladden from the Giants. We got a utility infielder by the name of Val Newman, who was able to play second, short, and third, give everybody a rest in the infield, one game a week, so on and so forth. And the biggest key of all, we got a closer. We got Jeff Reardon to finish ball games out. He was at that time, if not the best, one of the best closers in the game. We fit all the needs we needed, and then the rest of the guys took it from there. And we just peaked at the right time, played great baseball during the championship series and the World Series, and ended up getting ourselves a ring.
Uh, in '87. Tell us a little about the series against the Detroit Tigers, because the Tigers came in as a formidable team, and the Twins surprised them. What do you think was the difference?
I think that first of all, the Tigers ran away from the East that year. They had an amazing year. But I think that they clinched so early. I think maybe the game awareness got to them a little bit. I mean, we had to play till the very end of the season to clinch because we ended up only having an 80. We only had like 7 games over 500. So every game was important to us down the stretch. The Tigers had a little rest in between. They were able to set up their rotations, so on and so forth. And I think that we caught them off guard. We just basically caught them off guard. Plus, we had the home field advantage. We were the first. It's very difficult, and if you want to talk about the history of the game, for anybody, for any visiting team to come to the Metrodome and play well. The atmosphere, is it a baseball stadium? Absolutely not. It was awful to be but Minnesota only has a few months of beauty, and we're indoors playing baseball. It was frustrating as hell. But we made that our advantage. The white roof, all the other stuff, we made it our home and we dominated there. So for any visiting team to come in, it was tough there. And in that year, and in 91, actually, we had the home field advantage from the playoffs, from each level of the playoffs. And that made a difference because every game that was won was at the Metrodome, and we lost every game on the road. So, thank God we had home field advantage.
Take us back to Game One of the World Series, and your dominant performance, but also one where you were really efficient. You went to 3 balls on 2 different batters, and it was quite the extraordinary performance. Tell us what you remember about it, and how you were able to shut the Cardinals down.
Well, it's easy when they score 10 runs for you to start with. I mean, that offense was strong that day. And as I mentioned earlier, our defense was second to none because we worked on it in spring training, and it was just fantastic throughout the season. But I forgot one key element earlier that I just want to bring up. Another big move that the Twins made was we traded for Don Baylor at the deadline. And the reason why we traded for Don Baylor was because he was a perennial playoff player. He played every year. It seemed like he was in the playoffs. We picked him up. He had his locker between Kirby's and mine. So he was telling us what to expect. He guided us through the whole playoffs, what to expect, this, that, the other. Before the first American League Championship game, he goes, "We're going to go practice down there. And you're not going to believe this, but there's going to be around 600 beat writers, reporters on the field. They're going to be all over the place." And Kirby and I look at each other going, "You're crazy. Who are you talking about?" And we went down there, and it was exactly what he said. I mean, he guided us, told us what to do, what to expect, what to say at certain times. He was just amazing for what we needed at that time because we'd never been through it before. So it was just great. Okay, back now to the first game of the World Series. Fortunately, being able to pitch 2 games in the American League Championship Series, got me under control and stuff. And I knew that just getting through the first inning was a key. And I was able to make my pitches, as you mentioned. I got ahead in the count, let the guys put the ball in play, and was able to get by. And as I said, 10 runs later, I was able to go 8 innings. I think I threw under 100 pitches. So I was absolutely fine as far as coming back a day early the next time through. And that was that.
Is there any Cardinal hitter that, and obviously the 2 leagues did not play each other during the regular season, so this was all new to you, that you found to be particularly difficult?
Yeah, my future catcher with the Red Sox, Tony Pena. He was a pain in the neck. And he was hitting pitches above his head for base hits. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I was blessed too, and I could talk about this almost 40 years later, whatever it is, 37 years ago. Wow. Jack Clark was their best hitter, and Jack was on the shelf. He had pulled an oblique or something at that time, so he didn't play in the World Series, which is a big blessing for us. But it ended up being a mess for me because a guy by the name of Tom Lawless ended up getting the play in time that Jack would get. And that son of a gun would later on in game 4 hit a 3-run bomb off of me. So I'd rather probably have faced Jack instead of Lawless, but that was the situation. And then the other guy who was not at 100% at that in that year was Terry Pendleton. Terry was hurt a little bit. I don't think he swung right-handed. He played lefty, but he didn't swing right-handed. So that was advantageous when I was in the mound as well. So we had a couple of things that helped us. Plus, it was the first time they played in the Metrodome, and there was no place, as I mentioned earlier, like the Metrodome. I mean, I think they had a decimeter thing where they read the volume of the place, and it was like playing uh, with a plane taking over your head. After Game 7, when the series ended, it took me 2 days to get the ringing out of my ears. It was so unbelievably loud. So that was and the fans, there's nobody better than a Minnesota sports fan. They had never had a championship before. The Vikings had lost 4 Super Bowls, never really had a champion. So they took it all in, enjoyed it, and they were part of our success because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have done what we did.
Going back to game 4, and that was a difficult start for you. You gave
That was
up
a short-lived game, yes.
5 runs, and you mentioned the Tom Lawless 3-run home run, which was only the second home run he ever hit. Dixie would like to know what pitch did you throw him?
A lousy one. What happened in that game was opposite of what you had mentioned. I was behind everybody for whatever reason. I just struggled throwing strikes that game. And I believe it was 2-1, 3-1. I just wanted to get a fastball over the plate just to get back in the count, and he beat me. He acted, and we talk about the bat tosses and the history of the game and stuff. He was probably one of the first guys to throw a bat toss. If you look back at it in YouTube, it was a pretty good bat toss. And the funny part was Dan Gladden came in after the game, and he said, "You realize that cleared the fence by all of 1 foot?" But it was only, as you mentioned, it was only a second or third home run in his career. So I guess if you're going to enjoy it, that's the perfect time to enjoy it. So they got the best of me, and fortunately, I was able to rebound and get the opportunity after game 6 when we came back to get that game 7, to get the sour taste out of my mouth in game 4. But Lawless beat me, lousy fastball, behind in the count, which even in today's game, you fall behind the count, you put yourself at risk.
Now, and you come back to Minnesota, you're down 3-2 in that World Series. And obviously you wanted the chance to redeem yourself, given what happened in game 4. Tell us what you said to the team.
I didn't say anything. I just sat there going, just give me an opportunity to get the ball. That's all. I mean, the turning point was there was a good ball game going into the 6th, 7th inning, and then Ken Herbeck was coming up with the bases loaded, and Whitey decided to bring in Ken Daly, who was his best left-handed reliever, and on the first pitch, Herbie hit a grand slam and changed the momentum of the whole series right there. We went on to win that game, gave me the opportunity to redeem myself for game 4, and it worked out. I will talk about game 7 in a little bit, but I just don't want to get ahead of myself, so I'll let you go.
Well, it's a good time to transition into game 7 in the sense of you fell behind in that game. You were down 2-0. And, you mentioned earlier about some of the difficulties with composure, let's say early in your career, but you didn't lose your composure here.
Well, I also have to give credit where credit's due. Got through the first inning. I think I had a 1-2-3 first inning. Second inning, I gave up 2 runs and 4 hits. Fortunate to survive. In today's game, I would have probably been taken out, wouldn't have had a chance to redeem myself. I mean, that's the nature of the beast today. But I came in after the second inning, and in the Metrodome, you had a little tunnel. You had 44 steps up to your clubhouse, and I sat in that tunnel just to regroup. And Royce Morley, who was a teammate of mine, and he was one of the guys earlier in my career who I picked on when he made an error behind me. I embarrassed him, a veteran player. Probably had no business being my friend, but he gave me an opportunity to be my buddy. He came up to me and goes, "I know you don't want to be talked to right now, but I got to tell you this." And I go, "What's up?" He goes, "Just look back to that last inning." I said, "Okay, you gave up 2 runs and 4 hits." I said, "Yes, I did." He goes, "What were the 4 hits on?" And I was like, son of a gun, all 4 hits were changeups. And you got to realize it's the third time I've faced the same team in 9, 10 days. So they got a book on me like they have a book, like I have a book on them. I fell in love with my changeup, and they were just sitting back and waiting for it. And they put a hurting on me in the second inning. So long story short, go back out there in the third inning. Over the next 6 innings, I retired 18 of the last 19 guys on 71 pitches, 68 fastballs. I threw 2 changeups the rest of the game. and one curveball, and that was it. They would just, I guess my fastball going back to earlier in my career before my changeup is better than I ever gave myself credit for. And I fell into a lull there where I thought that I had to be something I wasn't. So if Roy doesn't say that to me, if Tim Lodden doesn't go behind the plate and start calling fastballs, I probably would have been knocked out. We wouldn't have had the game 7 wins. So I give a lot of kudos to Roy for getting in my head, telling me, hey, you got to change things up. I was fortunate enough to do that. And we scored 4 runs during the course of the next 6 innings, and we ended up winning the championship 4-2.
A couple of people have asked about your sweet music nickname, but also the fan who unfurled his banner, which had at least some uh, purported good luck. And I wonder if you could tell the story of your nickname and also about getting that fan tickets for that Game 7.
The nickname came into existence by all of you guys would probably know this by a guy by the name of Chris Berman, the nickname guy. Long story short, his initial nickname for me early on in my career was 101 strings viola for violin viola, and I ended up finally pitching a good game early in my career, and the Minneapolis Star Tribune in the headline said Viola plays sweet music versus whoever. So this is before cell phones, what have you, and 2 granny ladies who just were fans of mine, and I guess that was my fan base back then because I was married and stuff, and they said, that sounds so much better. It has a good ring to it. So they actually picked up the phone, called ESPN, and talked to Chris Berman and said, Chris, we think that 101 strings doesn't work. It should be sweet music. So Chris, being the professional he was, calls me up on a basic land phone and goes, which one do you like better? I said, truth be told, I love sweet music. And it stuck. It became sweet music the rest of my career. And people still ask me to sign baseballs and stuff, sweet music. So it's pretty cool. Um, what was the other half of that?
Yeah,
Oh,
about you apparently gotten him a couple of tickets for that game, given
no,
your
not the ladies, not the no, the banner
no
itself came into play during the '87 season. One day, Mark, I can't think of his name right now. Mark, I believe it was,
Dornfield.
just came. Yeah, it was a fan. Just came up and before one of my starts, looked up in right field, right in the corner there by the foul pole, and it said "Sweet Music Viola," and the rest is history. I think I went 20 games without losing a game. I mean, every game I pitched, he was at, and he was in need of a ticket in Game 7. And everything he did for me as far as that goes and stuff. Yeah, how do you turn that down? So left him a couple of tickets. Ended up working out pretty darn well. So, and now I think the banner itself is in a museum somewhere in Minnesota. So it's had a pretty darn good run. I appreciate everything he did for me, and it makes you feel really cool.
Now, the 1988 season was an exceptional one for you. What do you recall about that? And particularly, do you feel that you had sort of mastered the changeup at that particular time? Was that the sort of the height of your control?
I would say so, yes. I mean, there was a game in the Kingdome where I struck out the side on 10 pitches, and I'm coming off the field, and Timmy Lodner's behind the plate laughing his butt off. And I'm like, what are you laughing about? He goes, you realize what you just did? I said, yeah, I just struck out the side. He goes, no, you just struck out the side on 10 changeups. I was like, wow. I didn't realize at the time. So, yes, it made a big difference. I knew it was a pretty good changeup just for the fact that I even gave the pitch away and they still couldn't hit it. I mean, I guess I found out after I got traded from the Mets, from the Twins to the Mets, Todd Stottlemyre was pitching for Toronto. Mel was going to be my pitching coach with the Mets. So Todd calls his dad up and goes, now that he's out of the league, he's in the National League, just wants you to realize that we knew every pitch that he was throwing. I guess what I had been doing was with my changeup, you know how you had those old-fashioned gloves where your finger was out of the glove? Well, if my finger was on the glove, it was a fastball. When my finger came off the glove, it was a changeup, and every hitter saw it. But fortunately, it was a good enough pitch that I was able to get away with it. But um, yeah, I don't know how and why it became as it was. I'm very thankful that it did because 88, you mentioned, I think I had, of all the games, yeah, one bad game. I mean, one really bad game. The rest of the time, even when I lost, I pitched well. But looking back, it's real easy. I mentioned the 10 runs in the first game of the World Series. They averaged 6.5 runs for me as well. They scored runs for me. They played defense behind me. Um, I got credit for the wins, but I couldn't have done it without my teammates. And It was just a magical, magical year. The only thing that was frustrating was that we ended up losing. We came in second place to Oakland, didn't have a chance to play, and that was the year that the Oakland A's beat the Dodgers on Kirk Gibson's home run. So, I mean, they got to make history of their own, but it was frustrating because we were really good in '88. We were better in '88 than '87, but just didn't have a chance to get to the playoffs.
You started the All-Star game in 1988, pitched two perfect innings. Tell us what you recall.
How cool it was facing all these guys. I mean, I got to face Ryan Sandberg, who I'd never faced before. I got to face six pretty good ball players, and had 1-2-3, 1-2-3 inning. I got to throw to Terry Steinbach, who was a Minnesota boy, and had a good career at Oakland. I got to pitch against or start against Doc Gooden, and he ended up being my future teammate with the Mets. Um, it was just a great. It took me 7 years to make my first All-Star team, and just making the All-Star team was special. And we make a big deal out of the All-Star game. It's just a showcase. But then when you get there, you want to showcase the best you have. And I was able. Tom Kelly gave me the ball because of what I did in '87, the beginning of '88, and I'm thankful for that. And I was able to go 2 innings and just have the time of my life. It was pretty cool.
Now, tell us also about leaving Minnesota and going to New York. What happened?
I opened my mouth. A New Yorker getting himself in trouble. My agent and I were pushing. We were skirting the issue. We had after the '88 season, figured we had some serious bargaining leverage as far as contractually and stuff. And we started talking. My first 7 years in the big leagues. I was going year by year by year. Never had a multi-year contract. And we were pushing for a couple of years just to be able to say, hey, I've made it. But at that time, Carl Pohlad had just taken over their organization. It was finally corporate run and stuff. But I think we probably talked a little too much. And it was at the point where it was perfect for the Twins because they were looking to make a couple of moves because they needed to make a couple of moves to better themselves. So long story short, I got it all. I got off to a poor start. They ended up appeasing me. They gave me a nice 2-year contract. I think I was the highest paid player that year, along with Oral. So for 1 year, I was the highest paid player in the game, and I just didn't back it up. My numbers weren't great. Um, I come to find out 15 years later, when I got back to ESPN to do a year of ESPN baseball from Andy McPhail, who was my GM at that time. He told me the story behind the whole year. He said, spring training on, you were gone. You weren't going to survive the year because you could not have gotten us to the next level. We had to use you because you were our best trade bait. So by me opening my mouth about the contract and stuff, set it up perfectly because the fans didn't like it. They didn't want to hear that in Minnesota. And from that point on, it made it easy for them to put the best trade available or make the best deal available. And up until probably a week to 10 days before the trade deadline, I was going to be a New York Yankee. Andy told me the story. I was 100% New York Yankee. They gave me a nice offer. I was going to wear pinstripes, and it would have been frustrating as hell because, as much as I told you earlier, we hated the Yankees. I was going to have to play for them. Anyway, a couple of days before the trade occurred, Doc Gooden got hurt for the Mets. The Mets were in the pennant race in the East. And at the last second, the Mets put a trade together that the Twins couldn't turn down, and I ended up becoming a Met. And in being a Met, I was going to a team that I was a fan of from a kid, loved them, 69 on. But it also made all the difference because that put the Twins as world champions in '91 because they got Kevin Tapani, who turned out to be a pretty darn good pitcher. They got Rick Aguilera, who became a damn good closer. They got two other players, Savage and Drummond, who helped the ball club a little bit. But the key to the whole trade was a left-hander by the name of David West, who, God rest his soul too, he passed away a few years ago, but he didn't pan out as they expected, but they thought he was going to be the best of the five. But they did okay because, as everybody knows, Kevin Tapani had a terrific career and Aguilera did a fantastic job, and that's what led them to the championship in '91. So ended up going to the team in the Mets with all the talent in the world. We just didn't put it together.
Now, while with the Mets, you also started developing some troubles with your arm. I know bone spurs became a bit of an issue. And you'd been so durable, pitching uh, every 5 days for so many years. How were you feeling at that time?
Well, actually, it was before the bone spur. I had gone, you talk about a career and what you want people to, think about you as a pitcher. I think that the one thing that I didn't get enough credit for was my durability, as you mentioned. From my first big league start on June, I believe you said 6th of 82 till September of 1993, I did not miss a start. I did not miss one start. I got taken out of the rotation for one game in 83 early on against the Seattle Mariners. I ended up pitching the ninth inning in that game, and then they gave me my start back against Ron Guidry 5 days later. So I never missed the day I was supposed to pitch for almost 11 years. So I think that you match that up in today's game, you're not going to find anybody that can match those. I don't think you can find anybody could do that. Ripken had his streak at that time, which was unbelievable. But I think to give myself a little kudos, I think that streak is pretty darn good, and that's what I want to be known for. And it's just something that you give me the opportunity to share today, which I appreciate. But with the Mets, it was not the bone spur yet. It was uh, a tumor that formed in my nail of my throwing hand. It was my ring finger. I had a tumor that grew right here. And what it did was the second half of the year, I was absolutely awful, but real people didn't realize that tumor took away my changeup because I couldn't grip the ball. But I didn't want to miss the start because I had that consecutive streak going, so I didn't say anything. I had blood on every baseball I threw. Mel Stottlemyre is telling me, stop, stop. And I'm like, no, I'm paid to pitch. I'm going to pitch. And I pitched awful. And it was the year that was my contract year. It was the end of my career with the Mets. And I had two really, I had a great 90 season, ended up winning 20 games with the Mets, and then came back and made the All-Star team in 91. And at the break, I was pitching very well, and then the tumor formed. And from that point on, I was god awful. Fortunately, at the end of the season, I had two teams that vied for me. I got the tumor taken care of. I had the Toronto Blue Jays and the Boston Red Sox giving me two very, very legitimate offers. I ended up going to the Red Sox. And in 93, I had a good first year with the Red Sox, but the Red Sox weren't very good. It was Roger, myself, Wade, but they were going young at the same time. So they were in flux. And it was just frustrating because we just couldn't win. And at the same time, if I take that offer from the Blue Jays, I'm winning a World Series with the Blue Jays. Mr. Jack Morris should thank me for that because he ended up taking the same contract offer I turned down after the fact. But I had a good couple of years with the Red Sox. So fast forward to 83, May of 83. That's where everything changed in my career. I was pitching against the Seattle Mariners at Fenway, and there was a bang-bang play at first base. And as a lefty, for those of you who pitched, lefties have a tendency to fall off towards the third base side. And I was always late covering first base. So on this play, I was late per usual. Got the ball instead of trying to tag the base, which would have enabled the guy to get. I tried to sweep tag on him, and as I was putting the tag on him, my foot caught the corner of the bag, and ended up turning my ankle, rolling my ankle, and that was where my career took a turn. It was like Dizzy Dean with his toe. I tried pitching through it. I changed my delivery. I changed my mechanics a little bit. And next thing you know, a year to the day against the same Seattle team, I blew out my elbow from that. But the Spurs occurred later on that initial year because of the ankle situation. And I had some Spurs taken out, came back to spring training the following year, and that's when I blew out the elbow, and that pretty much ended my career.
And ultimately underwent Tommy John surgery.
Yes, 94, I went through Tommy John. It was the last year of my contract. Strike lockout occurred, no baseball, so I had no team to work with, no money coming in. I tried rehabbing it. I went to that spring training in Homestead, Florida. Remember when they had that big old spring training for all the free agents the following year when they were trying to put baseball back on the map? I did that. I probably threw too early, but I had to showcase myself to get an opportunity. So it ended up that the Toronto Blue Jays gave me an opportunity to go to extended spring training. I worked there for 3 months, built myself up. And we had a deal. When you get to a certain point, if you feel like you can compete and see where you're at, give yourself that opportunity. So in August of that year, the Cincinnati Reds came calling. That was the year they ran away with their division. That's when they had Smiley and Wells, and they decided they wanted to give one of those guys a couple-week break to get ready for the playoffs. So they gave me an opportunity to start 3 games for them. And Davey Johnson, who was my manager with the Mets when I was there, was the manager there. So he knew me, gave me a chance to start 3 games. I didn't pitch great, but I was healthy and I felt like, you know what, I still have something in me. So it gave me the opportunity to work that off season to see if I could do it one more time. And that's why I came back in 96 to try it one more time.
It and when did you tell us about the sort of the when you knew your career was over and the mental adjustment that came with that?
Well, 96, as I said, I got the opportunity with the Blue Jays. They brought me to camp. I was their last cut in camp, but they said, you got a 30-day show me what you can do type of scenario. So they sent me to AA in Orlando, which was my home. I got to pitch 4 games, I believe, in that month. And the last game I threw in Orlando was 7 no-hit innings. So the Blue Jays say, okay, he's got something. So they called me up at the end of the month. So I came up and I got 6 starts with the Blue Jays. And this is after the 92, 93 year, where they were great. Then they went down a little bit. So they were in flux as well. And after 6 starts, I pitched really well one game when Charlie O'Brien was my catcher, who was a veteran catcher who knew how to handle the game. The other 5 starts, I had a young kid by the name of Sandy Martinez who was not ready to call the game, and I needed some help. And I struggled in those 5 games. Even as old as I was and as veteran status, I needed help. And after this fifth start, sixth start, I went into Cito Gaston's office with Mel Queen, the pitching coach. I said, if you want me around, I need help. I need to have Charlie catch my games. And they said, basically, and it's the only time it ever happened. They said, well, perfect. You came into the office because we're releasing you right now because we're going to go young. And that was it. It was the first and only time I ever got released. I walked out of the locker room in Toronto. The last stop I made was to Charlie O'Brien's locker. And I said, Charlie, do I have anything left? And he looked at me and says, yeah, you just have to be in the right situation. And I walked out, went home, looked at my wife, had 3 young kids at the time. I said, you know what? Maybe this is the time. And I just walked away from the game. Do I regret it? Probably a little bit. But then again, I wouldn't have the relationship I have with my 3 kids today because I did spend quality time with them and played catch up for the years I missed them growing up. So, all the bad things and all the other stuff that you could look at and say, what if? You know what? It's not worth it. I had a hell of a career, had a lot of fun playing it, and it's all worked out well because I think I'm making a bigger difference now than I would have if I kept on pitching. I think I'm making a bigger difference now as a coach in the capacities I've had the opportunity to be in. And, that speaks volumes in itself.
When did you develop an interest in coaching? And tell
I
us
have
about
no
your
idea.
many stops.
I have no idea how that all started, John. I didn't know I was going to be a coach. It all started was, Frankie, my son at that time when I retired was like 11 years old. So he was playing travel ball and stuff. And I had a whole bunch of kids that I worked with. And we decided, what, let's take this next step. So we played some travel ball and I enjoyed that aspect of it. And my kids were going to a preparatory school at the time and the coaching job opened up at the high school. And I figured, wow, what better way to be around my 3 kids, my son and 2 girls, than being on campus and, seeing them while I'm putting a baseball program together. So I ended up coaching there for 6 years, watched my kids do their own thing, Frankie baseball. My daughter Brittany was a gymnast and she became an Olympic diver. And my youngest Kaylee became a pretty darn good volleyball player. So I got to watch them grow up, do their things. And I just fell in love with baseball again because I was teaching. I was doing stuff that I took for granted when I was growing up. So that took me from when the kids left Lake Highland, I left too because there was no reason to stay there. And I had an opportunity to do summer baseball. So I did collegiate baseball at the Florida League in Leesburg. I did that for 3 summers, had a time of my life. And at that point, that's when all the kids were doing everything. So my wife looked at me, and this is around 12, 13 years ago. So we were married around 28, 29 years. She said, you got to get the hell out of the house. You're driving me crazy. So that's when I decided, okay, on our 25th anniversary, it was around 25 years because the winter meetings were in Vegas. So we celebrated our anniversary in Vegas. And at the same time, across the street from where we were staying, the winter meetings were being held. So Kath goes, why don't you go over there, say hello to your friends, see what's got, see what's on, let's see what's up. So I went over there and ran into the first person I ran into was Eric Wedge when he was managing the Cleveland Indians. And I said, Wedgie, I played with him for a little bit with the Red Sox. And I said, I need to know if I could coach at affiliated level. So I said, why don't you come to spring training with us? I'm like, yeah, come on. This is the first year Cleveland left Florida to go to Arizona. So them and the Cincinnati Reds are opening up a farm, their spring training base in Arizona. So he invited me to be a coach, but not on the coach's level, just to be part of their coaching staff, but not the actual coach, and follow all the guys, learn everything, see if I would enjoy that aspect of it. So I was there for 6 weeks. And the trial basis was the first day I got there, Victor Martinez was just coming into his own, as a catcher, first baseman, hitter, everything. And I walk into the clubhouse and I'm going, okay, let's see what happens here. I've been out of the game for a while. So I went up to Victor. I say, Victor, how you doing? Nice to meet you. You're doing a terrific job. I'm Frank Viola. And behind him, he had 6 Dominican kids, all young kids following him because he was like a Pied Piper. And I'm like, well, if Victor shuns me, I'm in trouble because these 6 kids are going to go. So anyway, long story short, he turned around. He goes, you're Frank Viola. I said, yeah. He goes, you're the man. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, you're one of the best pitchers on Stratomatic baseball that I play. I'm like, so I'm sure the kids went back. They looked me up on, that's when the internet was starting to get big and stuff. They probably realized I had a pretty good career. And from that point on, I got instant respect because Victor acted as professional as he did. So I have to thank him a lot. So ran into JP Riccardi, who I knew known as when he was a GM with the Toronto Blue Jays. Said, "You ever want to get back in the game? Look me up." Well, that was the first year he took over as the assistant GM with the Mets. So I saw him at the winter meetings. He said, "I'm ready." He said, "Okay, I'm going to set something up." So set up a meeting in their suite. I went up there and walked out of there with the pitching coach job with the Brooklyn Cyclones with the Mets. So I ended up having an 8-year coaching career with the Mets and got the opportunity to work with the DeGroms, the Mats, the Syndergaards, the Fulmers of this world, and had the time of my life.
I have a potpourri of questions for you, Frank, from
Before
people in attendance. Is there a ballpark that you least like to pitch in, and why?
Wrigley, it seemed like every time I started, unfortunately, I didn't pitch in the National League that long, but every time I started, the damn wind was blowing out. And I was more of a fly ball pitcher than a ground ball pitcher at that time. So I got my lunch handed to me there. And in the American League, probably Old Exhibition Stadium in Toronto. You remember that football field that was a baseball field? Toronto had my number early on, and it pitched well, I lost. If I pitched bad, I got my lunch handed to me. So I did not have much fun in Toronto and Wrigley Field. Those were probably the two.
John would like to know what sort of mid-at-bat information would influence your pitch selection. What particular cues do you look for in hitter body language?
Well, especially after I got my change up, it was just seeing how the 10 to 12 to 14 miles an hour dictated their swing. Um, Wally Backman, who I ended up coaching with for 3 years with the Mets and one of the best baseball minds I've ever been around. I'm sorry he never got a big league managing job, but we talked about hitting and pitching and this, that, the other. He said the toughest pitch for any hitter, and Tony Gwynn and other guys have backed this up, is a changeup. You have a quality changeup. It is very difficult when the pitch is coming that quickly to be able to make an adjustment off a pitch 10 to 12 to 14 miles an hour. So basically what I look for, and the catcher, you have to trust your catcher a lot. They seem probably better than I did, was just how they reacted changeup versus fastball. And that's how you dictate a lot of stuff. I mentioned earlier that I had a slow curveball as my third pitch, my fourth pitch, whatever you want to call it. But the only time it was a show me first pitch where I knew that if the hitter was a first pitch fastball hitter or George Hendrick was at the plate. For whatever reason, George Hendrick, of every major league hitter I've ever faced, just did the same thing on my curveball every time. I throw a curveball, slow as hell, and he grounded third base. And I probably faced him 15 times in my career, and probably 14 times I got him on a slow curveball that he grounded to third base. I don't know how, why, but uh, that's what happened. But most of the time, it's dictated more so not what I see, but what my catcher saw, and that made a big difference too. Because when you trust your catcher, it makes life so much easier.
Corey would like to know what mental aspects of pitching did you focus on, and how did you prepare yourself mentally for each game?
Well, the big thing was just the same routine, doing the same thing. If anybody knows me, the night before I had my Italian food. I went to the same restaurants. I did the same thing. If you watch me, I was more of a creature of habit. I hit the rubber 4 times before every pitch if I was doing. I mean, I just did the same thing over and over again. That mentally prepared me for what I needed to do. I had the same Tommy John 5-pound weight routine I did before every start. I had the trainer massage my left elbow and left shoulder before each start. I mean, it was just iced after the game, same. I mean, it's just the same routine that you set up game in and game out. And the only time I altered it was if I had a bad game. I might have made a subtle change because just needed a change, but I never did anything drastic. I was just fortunate that whatever routine and why I did the routine, it worked for me for my whole career, and I was just thankful for that.
You mentioned Wally Backman a little while ago, and Ron asked specifically for about what your relationship was like with Wally.
Oh, it was the best. That son of a gun, what just a crazy human being, but just if anybody knew him, he's just a loving guy. He just cared about his team. I had an opportunity to coach with him in Las Vegas for 3 years, and I was just hoping that an opportunity would arise in the big leagues for him. I know he had that Arizona job for a day, but I was just hoping that somebody would give him that opportunity because I really believe that he might have asked me to be his pitching coach because we had that kind of relationship. He's one of those guys. He's like Jim Leland, he likes smoking. He didn't smoke when his hitters were at the plate, but when my pitchers were out in the mound, that's when he'd sneak. He goes, "Okay, this is your time, Frank. Just let me know that you're out of the inning so I can come back and hang out with you." He was just very trustworthy. We just had a very, very good association, and you don't meet too many player managers, players. Tom Kelly was like that. You're not afraid to go in and talk to him. Wally was the same way. His door was always open. If you had a bad day, if something was going on, he'd listen to you. It wouldn't go out in the press and all that other stuff. He just pretty much hurt himself because uh, uh, he'd pick and choose the wrong time sometimes to talk, and that sometimes got him in trouble. And I think that really took away from that big opportunity he could have had in the big leagues. And I think if he had that opportunity, he'd still be managing today. I think he was that good. And baseball wise, there's nobody better than him knowing the game, looking ahead, situations, stuff like that. He just didn't play out for him, but great, great baseball man.
Mark wants to know, you were a teammate of John Franco at St. John's, as well as 2 seasons with the Mets in 90 and 91. Did you recruit your former teammate, or was it simply a fortuitous trade?
Fortuitous trade. I was so thankful, though. I mean, you got to realize, too, we went from Randy Myers to John Franco. And if anybody knows it, Randy Myers was a maniac. Thank God we had Johnny come in here because, he just a class act all the way through. He should be, you talk about the closers in the Hall of Fame. There's a guy that should be in the Hall of Fame. If you're gonna open the door for closers, and that's another topic that I probably shouldn't say, but I think the Hall of Fame today is too watered down. I think that you're letting too many players in the game. I think that the Hall of Fame is the best of the best, and you're not letting the best of the best in. You're letting some of the good players in just to make room because they need names to get in there. But if you're going to open the door for the closers, John Franco should be one of the first ones you let in there because he was a left-hander, still has the same lead for left-handers in the history of the game. Pretty darn good.
Dixie wants to know, you faced Dave Winfield the most times of anyone in your career, 78 at bats. Although he hit the most home runs off of Frank's seven, he only hit a batting average of 220. What was it like facing Winfield in all of these all or nothing situations?
I tell people that was my most fun confrontation in my whole career. I'm glad you verified all that. I thought he hit a dozen homers off me. It just seemed like he hit a home run off me every damn time I faced him. But I also got him out a lot too because once I learned to change up, he was hit or miss. When I fall behind the count, he'd get me. When I get ahead in the count, I'd get him. I love facing Dave just for the fact that you're talking about intimidating people at the plate. You're talking 6'8", big old son of a gun. But if I threw a good changeup, he'd have, and if you remember Dave had a tendency to throw his bat. He'd lose his bat quite often. He lost his bat quite often on my changeup. So, um, best of everybody I faced in the game, he is the one guy I had the most fun facing. So it was reciprocal. I was enjoyable.
Another Mark wants to know, can you share your experience playing in Minnesota versus the bright lights of New York City?
I mean, it's easy looking back and saying why. I think that it was easier playing in Minnesota because we had two beat writers in the press. A couple of TV channels. Um, and I guess it helped. It helped growing up in New York and knowing the market there and stuff like that when I did get traded over there. But when you struggle in Minnesota, the fans give you the benefit of the doubt. The only time they didn't was because of my contract hassles, which I caused myself. So I have nobody to blame but myself on that one. In New York, when I got traded over there, I went over this my first day in uniform. We were playing the Cardinals, and they have to send me to a media room. And I walk in there and there's like 25 beat writers just there. And when the report comes out the next day from a question, the first guy wrote the article this way, the 25th guy wrote it this way. Is all of a sudden you have to realize, okay, I have to be really careful how I say things, when I say things, because everything could be taken and interpreted whichever which way, and you get yourself in trouble. Case in point, my last year when I was had the tumor in my finger and I was pitching awful, I had mentioned somebody had mentioned something about Don Imus getting on me a little bit. And I said, and here's my comeback. Who is Don Imus? I listened to Howard Stern. That's all I said. And if anybody who follows Imus and Stern, they did not like each other. So all of a sudden, word gets back. Imus starts a Viola suicide watch. And this is before cell phones. So there would be a Imus fan waiting outside Shea Stadium every game to make sure I got to the ballpark, and he'd call Imus and say when I was in the midst of my struggles, well, at least Viola made it to the ballpark today. So Don would call off the suicide watch for another day. So I just got myself in a lot of trouble, not realizing it, but growing up in New York, being a Met fan and loving the Mets, when things were good, boy, were they were good. But when they were bad, it didn't matter who you were because you were going to get it. And the thing I respect more than anything about the New York media, especially the New York media, as big as they never got personal with me. It was always my what I did in the field, and I respect that. They never got involved with my family. My wife, my three kids had the time of their life in New York. We had a wonderful time those 3 years there. So if you're thankful for anything, it's my performance. And if I pitch like crap, you know what? I deserve to be talked like crap. So I was okay with that. But that Imus suicide watch, that took a lot. That got to me. It really did.
Arthur wants to know, do you think there's too much emphasis in the major leagues on pitch counts these days?
I'm old school. I think so. You know, you could see this is where paperwork, this is where I'm bothered by the paperwork, the analytics types, the guys who haven't played the game. They're looking at paperwork and say, case in point, I'm just going to go to a few years ago. Blake Snell just signed a terrific contract with the Dodgers. He was pitching the game of his life in the World Series, and the third time through, he struck out the first three Dodgers bets and a couple of guys, 6 times their first two at bats, and they take him out of the game because this is third time through the lineup. Stop it. You know what? Pitch counts don't mean anything. Your eyes dictate everything. Guy could be pitching like crap and be 40 pitches into the game and having to be taken out because he's not going to get better. Some guys, David Cone as an example. David Cone got better as the game went on. David would throw 70 pitches his first 3 innings, and you're like, oh my God, he's going to be done after 4. Well, 7 innings later, he's throwing 110, 120 pitches, and he's still strong. Everybody's different. You have to treat it that way. And that's the problem with the game today. They treat everybody the same instead of realizing, you know what? Let games dictate things. I mean, you're not going to get another 300-game winner in this game because nobody pitches more than 5 innings. I mean, I tell this to the guys I talk to in independent ball. Do you know a lot of people don't realize that 162 innings, 1 inning per game, enables you to have an opportunity to win the ERA title? Well, back in our time, it wasn't 162. We were 230, 240. That's what our goal was. Back 3, 4 years ago, I believe only 18 pitches threw 162 innings in the game. I mean, there's something wrong with that. You're teaching these kids to throw as hard as you can. So when you're trying to throw as hard as you can, you're going to mess up your mechanics. And now you ask them to come back, especially relievers, 2, 3, 4 times in a row. I mean, you wonder why arms are blowing out. Give the starting pitchers the opportunity to showcase themselves. Let them go out there and show that they can pitch. The two best examples over the last 40 years, in my opinion, of guys who learned to be pitchers and became Hall of Famers from that. First one, Greg Maddux. Greg Maddux came in with the Cubs 95, 97, couldn't get anybody out. Professor Maddux took an off season, thought about it, realized, you know what, I could take 8 to 10 miles an hour off my pitches, start making movement off of those pitches. He wins 350 games later. In modern day, I mean, he's been retired, I guess, or he hasn't retired, but he's been out of the game for a couple of years. That similar to Greg is Zach Greinke, in my opinion. I watched Zach as a high school kid in Florida, my son's best friend growing up, throw 98, 99 effortlessly, but he realized, you know what? I don't have to throw that hard to survive. And he had 15, 16 years later, he was surviving. So I think that we're dictating too much off of trying to throw hard instead of becoming pitchers. And if you become a pitcher, then all of a sudden now the pitch count's not going to matter as much because you're saving your arm in the long run. So, Nolan had the right idea when he took over the Rangers and said, let's throw them a little longer. But I think you have to have the other ingredients too, where you stop throwing 100 miles an hour the hardest you can and realize, you know what? A good rhythm, good tempo, good delivery goes a long way.
Stephen would like to know, how did you as a left-hander approach pitching at Fenway Park?
It's, I don't think, I'd love to know the history, but I mean, I got the right people here. You got to look back. I don't think I ever gave up a home run in all my starts over the Green Monster. So it did not make a big difference to me. I gave up all my home runs to right field because what I did was I pitched against the Green Monster. If a righty's up, I'm throwing changeups away, fastballs away, let them take it the opposite way. And they did. They took a whole bunch of home runs that way, but I never pitched to their strengths and gave them the opportunity to go over the Green Monster. I honestly enjoyed my time pitching in Fenway. The only problem was I had the arm problems that came into play and that took away my effectiveness. I would have loved to pitch 5, 6, 7 years there with a good ball club behind and see what successes I had. I think I would have enjoyed that.
John wants to know how much tinkering you did with your changeup. Did you have any ways to alter its shape?
Yeah, I mean, big thing. Once I came up with the actual circle change concept, it was easy to play around with the rest of the stuff. The deeper I held the ball, the more I could take off it. The whole key with a good changeup is you have to think fastball throughout and just trust the grip. And if you do that, it makes it very difficult for a hitter. And the more that I was able to, when changeup became my pitch, I was able to probably take anywhere from 8 to 16 miles an hour off the pitch based on how I grip it in my hand. Deeper, slower, a little looser, a little quicker. But I always had, and I was always blessed from day one. I think that's why my career took off. I had that lefty natural movement where the ball just moves naturally. I played around with the four seam one time, and the four seam moved so damn much that I couldn't even throw it anymore because I couldn't command it in the strike zone. I had a Tommy John pitch when Tommy was supposedly marking up baseballs. He did a really good job. It was a consistent mark. I was pitching against him. I got the ball at the end of an inning. I saw the mark where he put it. So I figured, you know what? I'm going to throw a warm-up pitch and see how this thing moves. And I let it go, and I think the ball moved around 5 feet. I had no idea where the hell the ball was going. And I'm like, I can't use that. I'd love to be able to, if you're going to get away with cheat and try getting the opportunity to do that, I'd love to be able to, but if you can't command it, you can't do it. So I just think the biggest blessing I had was able to play around with the changeup, being able to change the miles per hour off of that, keep the guys off guard.
Dixie would like to know, you fanned Larry Parrish 21 times. Do you know why he was lost on your pitches?
I could probably, well, the two that I enjoyed facing more than anybody for knowing I was going to get him out was Larry and Mark McGuire. I could have told both of them the changeup was coming. They couldn't sit back and wait for it. Those two would just, I mean, you give them a fastball, take a hit, they won't miss it. But the problem was for them, I would never throw a fastball where they could hit it. I'd always show the fastball to be able to go back to the changeup, and they never made an adjustment to it. And fortunately, those are two guys I had better success against.
John would like to know, could you feel the increased elbow stress from changing your delivery early on, or was it something you only realized in retrospect?
No, I felt it back then we used to I used to throw every fourth or fifth day, mostly fifth day. And the Twins and the Mets were fantastic. They would not I did not for whatever reason like that extra day, that sixth day. And they were always nice to take that fifth guy and move him back to give him my day when I earned it. So what happened was I usually throw a 15 to 20 pitch side in between just to get back on the rubber, feel the rubber a little bit and throw catch. And as the season went on, I just felt a little more achy during the side work, more so the game, because the adrenaline flow in the game took away all the other stuff. It was the side work where you had to really fight for it when you're trying to get the tiredness out of your arm from the start before. That's when I started feeling it. And I got to a certain point where I felt the burn after each pitch. And on my follow through is like a little burning sensation. And as the burn got worse and worse, that's when I knew something was going to happen. But I'd never been through it. So I just figured, you know what? I'm going to keep going as long as I can because I'm getting paid. And when it happens, it happens. And that pitch in Fenway, I'll never forget that. I was two of my best buddies from St. John's were at the game. We're going to hang out afterwards. And I threw a pitch to whoever was at the plate, and the ball ended up going in the dugout at first base because once I got to the top of my delivery, I just felt everything rip in the elbow. So it was one pitch, but it was gearing up to be that point. So I just kept on going till I couldn't go anymore, and that's when it happened.
Can you tell us what you remember most about that 1987 Minnesota Twins team, whether it was the fans, whether it was the team itself, or something else?
The two you just mentioned played head to head. The team itself was special because we got along. If we went out to dinner as a team, or let me state it this way: if we were going to go out to dinner, we'd have 18 guys of the 25 guys out to dinner with us. We just got along with each other really, really well on and off the field. We showed the fans the love that we had for each other. And as the season went on, we proved to them, hey, it's going to be fun coming to the ballpark. And then they started showing up. And then all of a sudden, we continue playing good baseball, especially at the Metrodome. And all of a sudden, they backed us. And from that point on, the noise and everything else, the fan base. I mean, we were the first ones. You got the terrible towels with the Steelers today you see and stuff, but we were the ones. We started with the Homer Hankies. And that started the whole thing. So the love that we showed for each other led to the love the fans had for us. And then you put all that together and it's called success. And that's what we had. Time of our lives.
Now, obviously, Frank, you've been very gracious with your time, and I just want to have a couple of final questions for you. What do you feel it was the greatest highlight or the thing you remember the most from your playing career?
I mean, just trying to get to the pile after winning Game 7. I mean, I got to pitch 8 innings. I came out. That's when Tom Kelly, if anybody remembers that, he whispered in my ear, he goes, I know you can go out there for the ninth inning, but this is what we got Jeff Reardon for, so he's going to finish it up. And I was like, no, I mean, the respect I had for Tom was off the chart, and I knew exactly what was going on. That's why they had Jeff, so I was fine with that. So I ran upstairs before Jeff went out there to change my spikes. If we were going to win this, I didn't want to spike anybody. So I went upstairs, put my sneakers on, came back down. Jeff got the 1-2-3 ninth inning. And the last thing I remember was taking our first step out of that dugout going, please, legs, get me to that pile because we were on I was on such an incredible high. And I think that everything you accomplished in the game, the individual accolades and stuff, and I've had a bunch of them, and I'm very, very pleased and proud of it. It's something I could talk about now. But at the time, you play for one reason, and that's to play and win as a team. And as I said, 15 years, one playoff. I thank the dear Lord I was involved in that one. And for whatever reason, they thought I was good enough to be the MVP, which puts topping on the cake. But I would never have gotten that MVP award without the help of my teammates. And I think that's what made everything, and that made that the #1 highlight in my life, baseball wise.
When
My
people think
marriage and my marriage and my 3 kids and my third, they're the most I'm proud of. But baseball wise, it was the seventh game.
years from now, when people think back on your career in baseball as player or coach, what do you want them most to remember about you?
I'd like to think. I mean, I don't talk about myself a lot, so I'd like to think I'm humble. I think I could probably brag about my career a little more, but there's no need to. I did what I did. I had fun doing it. I think what I love more than anything is just the fact that I'd like to think I've made a difference in a lot of people's lives, good, bad, and different. Fan wise, I went out there every fifth day and performed, did the best I could. Coaching wise, I gave every kid every opportunity they could to become better and know that there was somebody always there behind them. And that's what I did as a father. I've just as a husband and a father, you just want to know that you're always there for your kids and your wife. You're gonna have good days, bad days, but you just pray that the good days are more than the bad days.
Frank, we're so grateful for you taking time to speak with us tonight, and several people have commented on the chat that they are so appreciative of you being here. Thank you for taking the time for this oral history and going back through these games, which mean so much to so many people.
Thanks for reaching out, John. Appreciate it. A lot of fun.
All right. I wish everyone good night. Thank
Merry
you
Christmas,
for,
everybody.
all right. Thank you.